Dr. Michelle Loria, the Enterprise CMIO, and I'm here to talk with you about the discharge workflow. The new discharge workflow creates an integrated process for physicians and nurses and leverages the use of existing data in PowerChart, eliminating much of the current duplicate documentation. It also populates the patient summary, which the patient goes home with, and the discharge summary, which is sent to the ongoing care providers, such as the PCP, with the same data. The new workflow does not eliminate transcription. You can still dictate your hospital course the same as you do today. However, it makes the discharge summary creation process much more streamlined and allows a multi-contributor hospital course. So we believe that the new workflow will actually decrease the need for transcription. The workflow all occurs within an M page called the discharge M page. This workflow is best utilized if documentation is done during the course of admission within the components of the M page, and creation of the discharge summary right here is saved until it's pretty certain the patient's going to be going home. The hospital course element right here allows multiple people to add to it and then save their documentation. And you can see all of the documentation that's been added here. The hospital course documentation will stay within this workflow M page until the first discharge summary is created and saved. That's different from the other elements on M pages, such as the history of present illness or the physical exam or the review of systems. For these elements, once a note is created using dynamic documentation, the information within these elements that you've put there for yourself for documentation is erased. And that's because the elements are designed to insert into the next note that's created. The hospital course is different in that it will stay regardless of any of the admission notes or consult notes that you create on this patient or the progress notes. But once the discharge summary is created and saved, the information in the hospital course will be erased. The discharge instructions for the patient, which are the patient instructions, is also unique to the discharge summary template, but it does not permit multiple contributions. Therefore, if you create a progress note or another note on the patient other than the discharge summary, the information entered here is not going to be erased, but you will not be able to see information entered by other users. You'll only be able to see your own information. And if you're creating the discharge summary, the information entered by other individuals will not be included in the discharge summary you create. Well, what happens if you create the discharge summary and then something happens and the patient doesn't go home? If you've only saved the discharge summary, which if you're not 100% certain the patient's going home, but you're 95% certain, we recommend creating the discharge summary and saving it. You can go into that saved discharge summary and do inline edits. However, you will need to refresh all of the auto-populated components, especially if they've changed, such as the medication list that the patient's going home with or any pending lab or rad studies. You will need to refresh all of those items individually. There are 14 auto-populated items, and they are all listed in the discharge summary flyer. If you've signed the discharge summary and the patient doesn't go home, and there's been significant changes to their care, which typically happens in this scenario, then you need to mark the signed discharge summary in error. You can still tag the items there, but you'll need to create a new discharge summary and then insert the tagged narrative that you previously saved. You'll also see that there's a note template here called discharge order. If you're going to dictate the hospital course, then you want to create the discharge order note. It has all of the components that the discharge summary has, except for the hospital course. In addition, the discharge order has just a single column in it versus the discharge summary, like all of our other notes created with dynamic documentation, are 2 columns. So use the discharge order if you're going to dictate the hospital course. You should also use the discharge order if you want to get the patient out the door, but you're going to create the hospital course later. And in that setting, you want to use the discharge order to create a note to get the patient out the door, and then you will addend your discharge order note and insert the hospital course there. You'll then change the note type to discharge summary. So enough chatting. Looking at the discharge M page, some of you may not see that M page listed in your provider view. So if you don't see this discharge tab, then that means you need to go to your provider view, click the plus sign, and you'll see discharge. And if you click on that, it will add it to your tab on top. You can quickly rearrange these tabs by dragging and dropping. Within the discharge tab, I have all of these other items that we call components. I recommend putting all of your required components in a group and putting all of your free text narrative components in a group. Like the other M pages, the discharge M page allows what we call the contextual view or the multiple pane view. This means that I can have the chart here and then the free text elements on the side. The way for me to see it on this tiny screen is to decrease my screen resolution to 75%. And then I would click these arrows and move them over. This is sticky to me into this M page. So once I set it up this way, whenever I have an adequate screen resolution, I'll see these free text components on the side. If I go back to 100% view, you'll see that I go into a single column, and that's because my screen resolution doesn't support it. Back to these required components. There are 6 required components. If they are not completed, you'll see that they have a red asterisk in front of them. So I went ahead and changed the problem list, and I got rid of everything that said this visit. That means that I don't have any problems or diagnoses listed as being addressed this visit. Once I select a problem, you will see that this now changes from the red asterisk to the green check mark. So you need to have one this visit problem. You also need to have a discharge order placed. I've already placed my discharge order, so this is showing that it's satisfied. Let's say it had a red asterisk. I could just click this plus sign. The discharge order is going to automatically display for me, and it's going to require that I associate the discharge order with one of the this visit diagnoses. By clicking submit, it puts it into the order cart, and then you just have to complete the required fields and do the diagnosis association, which is just checking a box. Discharge medications is just your standard discharge med rec. It's a required component. There are no changes here. Discharge quality measures takes all of the items that were in the power note for tracked quality measures, and it puts them into a power form. This allows these elements to be stored discretely. Previously, they were stored as free text, and then someone went back in and did manual chart review. This component only exists in the provider workflow M page. Same thing with the problem list, the order profile, and only the provider can do discharge med rec. Someone's already started the discharge quality measures form for me, and I can see what they've already documented. However, I could modify this by clicking into here, and then I would click Modify the Power Form. Power Forms work a little bit different than other provider documentation tools. So if my patient had pneumonia, it's going to have some yellow boxes, and I have to complete everything. I have to check something in every box that's yellow. And it has radio buttons, which these are only single select. So if this is a healthcare associated pneumonia, I have to say what the organism is and strep. And once all the yellow boxes are completed, then I can hit this back arrow, which is going to take me back to the power form. And then to sign the power form, I click the check mark. It's really important for the pneumonia measure that you document within your discharge summary the type of pneumonia and whether or not the organism was specified, because this has a big impact on the acuity of care measures that we experience as an organization. The results of these quality measures do not flow to the discharge summary. They flow to their own separate form. In this pneumonia documentation does not really replace good documentation of what happened to the patient within the discharge summary. Patient education is shared by both providers and nurses. It will suggest education topics from the CRAMES database of education materials based on the problem list. You can see that several titles were already added, and again, this can be contributed to by providers and nurses. This functions the same way as the education component of your toolbar up on top. The follow-up component also is the same as the follow-up component in the toolbar. You can save favorites as quick picks. You can do a lot of sophisticated setup here. Again, this is shared between providers and nurses. And you can see that there's been a lot already set up on this patient. And once I'm done with these, I'm now left with the free text entry. Again, we recommend waiting until discharge to actually create the discharge summary. Create like a progress note or some other note on this patient, because the history of present illness, physical exam, and assessment and plan are shared between multiple end pages, and they're going to flow to the next note created, even if that note does not include them in their template. The hospital course functions differently. I'm just going to drag and drop these a little bit. Again, because it's only in the discharge summary and it allows multiple contributors. Patient instructions does not allow multiple contributors, but it's only used in this end page, and so it's not going to be erased when you create other notes aside from the discharge summary. These components will function the same as the components, these narrative free text, as other end pages. So you can use auto text, you can use tagging, and before you start your discharge summary, it's very useful to go ahead and tag items from within the chart. And to tag something, I highlight it, and then I can click the tag button. Sometimes I have to left click and click tag. I can also quickly tag labs. When I tag labs, they will automatically insert into the lab section of the discharge summary. In order to tag multiple labs, I hold down the control key and I highlight each one. You can see that they show up here on the right, and then I click tag. I can also tag the results of diagnostic studies and microbiology and other items as appropriate. It's important to get your tagging done before you sign your discharge summary, because tagged items cannot be used in addendums. At this point in time, I'm going to go ahead, and I'm pretty sure my patient's going home. I'm going to select the discharge summary note template. If I were going to dictate my hospital course, I would select the discharge order. It's going to have all of the same elements that the discharge summary has, but it's a single column. Transcription will take what I document and sign in the discharge order, because that note is sent to transcription services, and it will combine it with my dictated discharge summary and send it back to me for signature. Both discharge order notes and discharge summary notes will be automatically sent to the primary care provider. If you need to send your note to other individuals, you can do it via the signature pane when you're signing your note. If you dictate into your hospital course the other providers you want to send your note to, transcription services will do it for you. Remember, I said before that if I'm going to come back and manually enter my hospital course later, I want to use the discharge order note, sign that, and then go back and addend it and change the note type to discharge summary. I'll show you how to do at the end of this. So I'm going to go ahead and create my discharge summary. This is telling me that someone has already started and saved a discharge summary, me, and I can either update the existing discharge summary or create a new note. If I choose to update the existing note, none of the auto-populated items will refresh. I will have to go in and manually refresh each item. If you don't do this, you may have the wrong medication list in your discharge summary, the wrong follow-up instructions, or the wrong pending labs and rads. So it's important to wait until your patient's ready for discharge. You can collect the hospital course in that hospital course component, and it will stay there and allow multiple individuals to contribute to it until the point in time you create your discharge summary. I'm going to go ahead and create a new note, and there are several additional free text areas of this note I need to fill out. In addition, it's going to pull in a lot of information. If I were a nurse practitioner or another individual who had to have their discharge summary co-signed, I would put my name in here as the initiating author. And that's because my name is not going to appear in the document header. And it is important for the ongoing care providers to know that I'm the person that cared for the patient during the hospitalization and sent them home. If I'm an attending provider generating this discharge summary, there's no reason to put my name in here, and it's going to be eliminated from the template. You can see that the code status automatically pulled in. If I had an active diet order, it would have pulled in, and you can see the activity order already pulled in. I can modify any of these items to reflect what I want to happen. And I can modify the code status order here if I want to. When I modify it, it exists only in my note. It's not going to go to other notes or other individuals. For the follow-up recommendations, I can add them right here at the bottom of the note, or I can add a recommendation for each separate problem that was addressed this admission. So this allows one to do problem-oriented documentation or just give a list of follow-up recommendations for the ongoing care provider. Discharge disposition needs to be entered. Even though you put it in your discharge order, that disposition does not pull into the note. We couldn't do that. So if I need to add that I'm going to send this patient home. You can see the patient education titles already pulled in. Here are the pending lab and rad studies. I'm going to put regular, and condition at discharge is stable. And these would be follow-up recommendations to the ongoing care provider. The patient instructions show up further down. The patient instructions are also going to appear on the patient's summary, which is why we put them further down, and they show up as discharge instructions. History of present illness. Remember how I previously tagged that information? I can just drag and drop it here. And hospital course. I can type that in. I can use Fluency Direct. After giving IV antihypertensives and restarting the patient's oral medications, the patient did much better, blood pressure stabilized, the headache resolved, and the patient was able to go home. I started my microphone a bit too quickly. I can also use all of the smart templates here that we've, auto text, sorry, that we've previously created. Here's the detailed physical exam. And within this, I can select items of that using M-Modal and overwrite them if I want to. Select warm and dry, sweaty, unpleasant. The discharge medications table is going to be the same on the patient summary as the discharge summary. And you can put instructions in here, such as pick up at the pharmacy, or you could say, take as instructed so you aren't readmitted, or something more pleasant. Procedures and operations during this visit will auto-populate if they occurred. Once I'm done with this, if I'm not 100% certain the patient's going home, time spent on discharge. I want to fill this out if it's more than 30 minutes. If I'm not 100% certain the patient's going home, I'm going to click Save. And when I come back, it's going to give me that pop-up. If I'm really sure the patient's going home, I'm going to click Sign and Submit. I'll get to the signature pane. The signature pane has some great features. First of all, it's going to auto-associate the note type. Secondly, you can see that it allows me to save favorites, people I like to communicate with frequently, recents, and then anybody that has a known relationship with the patient. I can also enter here anybody who is either from within EMHS or from without EMHS, and this will be sent to them using their communication preference. It's always auto-distributed to the primary care provider, so I actually don't have to send it to anyone if only the primary care provider needs to be communicated with. If I'm going to dictate my hospital course or enter my hospital course after the patient is discharged, I'm going to select the discharge order. Again, it's single column. It's going to auto-populate with all of the same items as the discharge summary. It's going to have the same free text fields for me to complete, and it's going to allow me to add tagged text. And you can see that it has pulled in the labs that were that I've tagged, which I did in between the two notes. I would click Sign and Submit this note, and then transcription would send me the combined note back. To come back and addend a discharge order with a hospital course, I would open the discharge order note, and then I would click this Modify button up here, and that will allow me to addend the bottom of the note. It will not allow me to insert tagged elements, and it does not allow me to do inline edits, although put a strike through them or X them out. Once I'm done inserting my addendum, I then need to change the details of the note and change the note type to discharge summary. I got to this box by clicking on this blue hyperlink, and then I would just change from discharge order to discharge summary and click OK. This completes the discussion of the new discharge workflow. Again, it maximizes existing chart data. It allows multiple contributions to the discharge summary and leverages both the nursing and provider workflows. It aligns the patient summary and the discharge summary. And it has this great component here called the hospital course, which allows you to document it throughout the course of the patient's admission. Finally, we recommend waiting to start the discharge summary until you are very certain the patient's going to go home. If you don't do this, then save it, then when you go back to discharge the patient, there are 14 separate auto-populated components which may need to be updated. the most important to update being the medication table and the pending lab and RADS. Thank you very much.